I'm not sure how many of you really know where the London Borough of Newham is. You may, I hope, know where Stratford is and where the Olympics was. But that's just to show you where we are in the London picture. We are a significantly sized London borough. We have a population of around 330. I say around because obviously it keeps changing and in the direction of rising. So obviously we're bigger than Iceland, which will be significant on Monday. We are bigger than the City of York. We're bigger than Leicester. So it goes on. I could give you a whole list because I have looked them up. So we're a significant area of growth in London, and cumulatively with some of our other East London borough neighbours, we are the place where development will happen in the next 10 to 20 years because we have enormous capacity between us. I think 65% of the London plan housing target will be delivered in the 4 East London boroughs around us. So, we are where it's at for the next 20 years. We obviously also, as does the eastern part of a lot of cities, we are that part of the City of London that had all the heavy industry. And there's a very long and rich tradition of that in years gone by, which had its benefits in terms of employment. We've lost that. We have to reinvent the place that we are. We have to provide for new needs as they press on us for the future. And we're very much up for doing that. So this is London Borough of Newham. This is the districts that are comprised there, many of which I hope you will know, such as West Ham because of the football team, etc. I think some of the big things that we have that maybe people are slightly unaware of, the Royal Docks. I don't know if any of you have gone across on the cable car to the O2. So the O2 is the London Borough of Greenwich, or Royal Borough of Greenwich, and the other side is the London Borough of Newham. So, post-use, the Royal Docks is something that needs to be reinvented, and then we move up to the west side of the borough and up through the old Lee Valley and its post-industrial nature up through to Stratford. And as Chris has said earlier, the Olympic Park is the prime example of a massive brownfield development. It was old railway sidings and was very heavily contaminated. And that is the tone of most of our large sites in Newham. That strip outlines these particularly dense post-industrial areas where a lot of our very large sites exist. The red line shows you where the London Legacy Development Corporation operates, so a large part of the Legacy Development Corporation area is in Newham, 65% of it, and then it seeps out into Tower Hamlets, Hackney and Waltham Forest. So that's a bit more of the Legacy Corporation boundary, and I think that leads me on to talking about the brownfield challenges that we have. The Olympic site is a fantastic example of the challenges, the opportunities, and some of the solutions as well. And that there's a wealth of information on this subject, but it was no mean feat the way that project was carried out. It was a really, really contaminated area, and the fact that it had a front-loading public funding opportunity to clean it up and do it for that particular purpose. I mean, that probably would have in itself, in normal circumstances, have taken 20 years to get all that together and for people to recognise the potential and do the cleaning up and then develop. And obviously the Olympic bid and winning of it and doing of it has meant that that's happened much earlier for us, and we're very grateful for that. And they have some fantastic sustainability credentials on there in terms of how they reused materials, they washed them on site, and that depressed the amount of lorry movements in and around the area. So it's something to really look into if you're interested in this field. So for us, the challenges. Most of our development opportunities will be in that arc that I showed you on the slide earlier. It will and can deliver probably a minimum now of about 42,000 homes. We're looking at in excess of 80,000 jobs. And nearly all of those very large sites are contaminated in some shape or form. So the history that we have in Newham has meant we have, railway lands, we have chemical plants, we've had metal plants, we have the raw docks and the contamination of the land side of that, as well as the water side in terms of the wharves and what they were used for. We basically got it all, and nearly all the big development sites that I'll run through later have had an element of traditional brownfield challenge attached to them. Yet they have come forward, they are being developed, and there are many more in the pipeline. So it's not an insurmountable challenge. And I think what brings you to that point is to actually understand what you get out of it at the end of the day. London needs what we can develop in those areas, and I think by hook or by crook we have to find a way to make sure that they come forward, and that some of the constraints of the site are not seen as such. They're just, gnarly problems that we have to engineer solutions to. I think it's important for us to set frameworks to get people to understand that those post-industrial sites, and in fact, some of the ones you'll see from the cable car, as I referred to earlier, when you look back onto the Newham side, you'll see quite a long strip of recycling plants, metal recycling plants that, are fairly unattractive to look at, adjacent to land that's been safeguarded to build the Silvertown Tunnel. And when that is scoped out, how much of that land do we need? What are the impacts going to be? And we've worked very hard. I mean, probably too hard in some respects, because I think there's something like approaching 90 master plans and strategies about the rural docks and what we should do there. I think we all have agreed that we need to draw a line under that now and just get on with the job. Perhaps events this morning may make us all pause on that one for a little while, but we believe that, whatever happened this morning, London still needs housing, it needs jobs, we need to develop these areas. Those things have not changed, and the opportunity remains there today as it was yesterday. And we very much hope that by making sure that we tell people about the opportunities, that they'll take up the challenges of dealing with these sites. For us, another part of the challenge is the quality and quantity of infrastructure. So, large swathes of areas that have been industrial do not have the infrastructure ready to support predominantly residential-led redevelopment. That has to be factored into the development. That's also another key plank of how we get our communities to accept this really quite phenomenal level of growth in quite a small area. And unless the quality of the infrastructure in these projects is good, and also enables them to come in to these new sites and these new neighbourhoods, people won't accept that level of growth. And in areas like Newham, where there's always been a great support for this, we may well see that sort of sentiment change over time. And so that, that idea of the community and the stakeholder buy-in is really very important. So, for example, we have London City Airport in the London Borough of Newham. That has certain constraints that it places upon the areas around it. It's the established business. It wants to expand. We're very supportive of that. But it also has to protect its own operations with regard to the development sites that come in and around it. That has implications for heights of buildings and the nature of how they operate. And so those existing stakeholders in these areas of change, as well as the communities that perhaps are on the edges but need to be brought in, it's really important to keep them with us, because this scale of change won't happen unless everybody thinks it's the right way to go. We really consider, although obviously depending on the definition for brownfield registers, which we might have to moderate, but the whole borough is brownfield. I mean, that's it. There's no getting away from that. We have our metropolitan open land and our parks and so on, which we would like to maintain as sacrosanct. But the whole borough is brownfield. That's it, and that's largely the case with most of London. So I think the whole sort of focus on brownfield land is a bit of a red herring, really. We're all just having to get on with whatever potential that we have. As I say, we have these 28 strategic sites delivering these huge quantums of housing and jobs. I don't think we ever need to go into what's the evidence base about why you need housing and why you need to shift sites from particular designations that, the strategic industrial designations from the London Plan. There are 10 people working on huge amounts of sites. It's just a complete waste of a resource that is finite and precious and can perform extremely good social and economic functions for us. And, it just cannot stay sitting in that sort of state. So I think we all have to take that as a given, and that will be the pressure for the redevelopment of these sites. So going back to the point earlier, high value uses, it's resi, and then, often in these areas that didn't exist for that purpose, they quite clearly have got very high infrastructure needs. But I think we see that as an opportunity because, as I say, you build a new school on the site and you make sure that neighbouring existing communities are able to access that, and that's how you integrate your communities. So these are all quite important tools for us, and they're not seen as a negative. I think it's more challenging where you want to ensure that you've still got some local job opportunities and modern industrial premises. How do you factor those into land that has this extremely high hope value for residential? And we have a number of tensions in some of our big sites down in the docks, but it is absolutely socially necessary for us as a borough who had a traditional sort of a gap with London average employment levels, that we have tried really, really hard post-Olympics as one of our legacies. Well, we were doing it before the Olympics, to be fair, to close that gap. And we've been really successful on that. We're moving up to shutting down a 20% gap to somewhere just under 10%. So, we're really proud of the fact that we've been really good at that, but we need to still carry on with that for the future. It's not going to mend itself. So how do we set frameworks that encourage people? I mean, some years ago when we first started doing the local development framework, as it was then, and the process of having good, strong evidence base, one of the things that we discussed, given the levels of, very traditional brownfield development opportunities that we had, was, should we try to lead on a, how contaminated are our sites sort of approach, to do that sort of initial assessment in a borough-wide fashion and sort of front-load it so that it was a central piece of information that people had. I'm sorry, that wouldn't be very good for your business necessarily. But, to sort of give people that essential information, it's easy enough to say, oh, this site is brilliantly located, it's, 300 metres from the Jubilee line. But, the nitty-gritty of it, and in terms of, whether people want to come and invest, always come down to these sorts of issues. But we didn't do that and decided, like nearly everybody else, on the approach that everybody comes along and does their own assessments. But I still feel that that's perhaps a bit of a missing link that we may look to close in the future, to have some, at least a more strategic picture of the nature of some of the contamination in particular that we have. But, it can be off-putting, and obviously we'd want to not put it in that category. But I think we still do have to be clear about what the costs and the time periods that we have to deal with. I mean, I've told you we've got an airport, we've got the docks, so what's in the docks, given its, historic use and all the traffic that went there, what's left in the land, in the wharves, not all of that is clear either. Engineering works, metal works, chemical works, we have sites that have, mercury reading monitors on them at this moment in time, but they are designated for mixed use because you can remedy these things. And, but we do really have everything that you can think of all in one place, as well as this enormous opportunity that London can't afford to overlook. So we will always have to find a way. We've also got some ecological issues, and I'll show you on one of the sites later. But anyway, it is the multiplicity of things that we have to deal with, but we're really confident that that can happen. In preparing for this, it's quite an obvious thing. We should have that clear and up-to-date guidance, and perhaps additional information that we haven't had in the past. And I would have to say, in looking at our websites, you know, some of the contaminated land functions are not controlled through planning and regeneration, they're dealt with through environmental health. And we need to all link up a little bit more, because the guidance that's out there is somewhat dated, and I think we need to have a better story to tell on that. And I think that's important for people who are coming to see what the opportunities are. So I've talked about the contamination issue, the lack of infrastructure, and also that the infrastructure provision can provide that bridge for the community. I think another thing for us is, you know, a lot of these areas that no one's ever lived in them, they've performed different functions land use wise for hundreds of years in many cases. And so another part of this is all about, you know, branding and marketing new places, and we do need to pay attention to that, because just because people come along and build, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the whole of London suddenly understands that Thameside West industrial estate is now Thameside Village, and where that is. I mean, you know, that's a big piece of driving interest in this. And then obviously the integration point, integrating new and old communities, establishing new communities, you know, is really important for us to maintain the quality of the developments that we would like to see. And quality and quantity of infrastructure, I think, has a huge role to play in that. You know, we've got some parts where we've got some very weak existing infrastructure, but on the whole, we're all looking at new provision, and we try and make that as efficient as possible. So we've obviously had, as with most London boroughs, big school building programmes over the last 10 years. You know, we condition those schools, given that they are provided for by public money, albeit from central government, that they will always be adaptable to provide for community facilities, for example, and that they're big enough to accommodate future growth of sites across the road that currently don't provide any child yield. But, you know, if these things all come to fruition, down the line they will. So we're trying to future-proof some of the infrastructure provision we're doing ourselves. The issue as well around infrastructure on sites, people tend to look at their red line boundary, etc. We have a big issue as a local planning authority, as every local authority does, about future funding. We're looking at scenarios where we are not funded by grants by 2020. That's just around the corner. We need to drive our own asset base, to drive our own revenue streams for the future, to pour back into services. So we, in Newham in particular, as an authority, are interested in investing in lots of the development opportunity that is in our borough. And part of that will be in investing in infrastructure and, you know, using our prudential borrowing powers to make sure that happens. And a big part of that, though, is this whole idea of how do you keep paying for it for the future? But, you know, those are things that we look at in particular with the new sites. So all of that, if you can get that right, you know, you end up with your community and your stakeholder buy-in. But we have this particular problem, I think, not problem at the moment, but with a change in the nature of our population and people moving into the borough who have the time and the inclination to get more involved in the quality of the built environment. We have a growing group of people who are more challenging about the implications of development, and many of those will fall into the sort of environmental category of shifting brownfield land into mixed use and viable districts and neighbourhoods for the future. We have currently a very young population, much more so than lots of other London boroughs. I think we're something like the second youngest authority in the country. And that sort of energy of youth, which I hope hasn't been knocked out by events this morning, means that they're very, very open to the change as long as there's something in it for them. And so that leads us into the whole debates around affordable housing, what's the nature of it, you know, how do we make sure that these things deliver for our existing populations? And that is really at the heart of the council's political views. And probably more than the built form, their interest is in how does it affect the people. And one of the things that we've pushed on lots of our very large sites in the last 10 years is about local employment opportunities. We have our own job brokerage service, and this has been successful in getting 30,000 Newham, only Newham residents, into work. And when I say into work, into sustainable work, jobs that are 12 months plus, that's the sort of evaluation of it. So that is really, really, really important to us. And in some respects, it is something that would probably be more important to us than perhaps some of the sustainability criteria that you might choose to have as a characteristic of your development in our particular circumstances. So professionally, that's been quite a challenge for us, because politically and with knowledge of local circumstances, there will always be choices that you have to make in the balance of any development, and that's where the priority lies for us at the moment. So, we want all this to be beneficial for everybody. And I think we also have to be honest about the changes and the impacts that people will have to take on board when places near to them that have never had residents will suddenly have a lot. So we've got a site at the moment that should generate 3,500 homes. That's one of our sites. And that's, it's a traditional industrial area, it's scrubland, it's never had to, the school that exists across the road hasn't had to deal with any children coming from that site or any other pressure on any of the other local infrastructure. So that's just one little patch in the picture. So I'm just going to quickly just run through some of the sites, and these are all proper order brownfield sites that are in the making in Newham. And there are a whole stack of others that are not even up here that I could talk to you about, but just to show you some of the stuff. So that's one of the, that 30,000 new home target is sort of stripping out from the Legacy Development Corporation part of our borough. They have a separate target now, but that's just in the rest of the borough. So we've got very big players coming onto the rail lands. This is part of the Stratford City development, adjacent to the Olympic development, 350 new homes, huge amount of commercial floor space. The FCA and TfL are moving into Stratford, and that's something that, 15 years ago, people would have said, A, where's Stratford? And B, neither of those type of institutions would ever thought that to come, because they say their staff wouldn't want to go there. But times have changed. So that's the Legacy Development Corporation, some of the developments that are going on there. Their overall output is around 6,500 to 7,000 on the adjacent sites in and around the Olympic Park. The big story there too of late is the Cultural and Education District, which some of you may know as Olympicopolis, but that terminology is not being used anymore in the new mayoralty, which probably fair enough. So again, it's that sort of blue chip change from Central and West London coming east, the V&A, Sadler's Wells, the University of the Arts, an element of the Smithsonian. These are really big, powerful institutions that say a lot about the place. So I think they're very good markers of the fact that we've come a long way and used our brownfield land to really good effect. This is another sort of trendy development that it's good to have in your borough, the Manhattan Loft Gardens. And again, that's in Stratford. If you like tall buildings, this is one of them. 42 stories. It's not the tallest proposed in and around that area, but it's one of the ones that will be developed out in the near future. Strand East is the property arm of IKEA. They're called Vastint. We've just done a CPO to help them assemble the last part of their site, which we've won. And so that will go ahead. And again, that's another mixed-use development. Paid a lot of attention to the traditional lanes that were used on that site, and that was a lot of engineering businesses there for the last sort of 150 years, related to the rail lands in Stratford and the activity there. And here we have a new housing and job focused quarter. So this is one of our own sites, the Carpenter's Estate. This currently has about 700 homes on it, and this is also something we need to renew and refresh for the future. We're looking at a minimum of 2,000 homes on this, and this will go out to market at the end of the year. West Ham Stadium, some of you may know about. Obviously, they've moved to the Olympic Stadium from August of this year, and the stadium will be redeveloped to provide, actually it's around 800 homes with some mixed use at the front, but largely, again, it's a residential development. Bizarrely, in planning terms, the pitch was actually green space, which is a slightly odd thing because obviously unless you had the money to buy the ticket, you would never be able to access it. So, however, we have obviously gone down the route of looking at a new use for that. We don't want that to sit there empty. It needs to provide a function for local people, and we believe that's what it's doing. The council itself is likely to invest in the affordable housing element of this scheme, so we're doing everything we can to make sure it all happens. Canning Town and Custom House is a council-led regeneration programme aimed at rebalancing that community. Back in the 90s, there were lots of issues around this area. It was 80% social housing. The Jubilee line came to Canning Town in the late 1990s, which the council had lobbied very hard for, and we then moved into an era of, looking at how we can regenerate that area, rebalance its function and its uses, and that project is a long way into fruition now. We've built more homes than we knocked down. It's all looking good. We've got a new town centre. We relocated the town centre to make it closer and more visible from the tube station. Jubilee line's going to have 24-hour tube. So, it's all working. But again, that was very old and tired established development, has its challenges too, with obviously having to bring the community with you, but lots of them have gone back into the new development and are very pleased with it. So if you do it right and pay attention to the right things, it can work. So this is the Royal Docks, and the area in general has about 9,000 new homes as a potential. It probably will get to be more than that. This is one of the dockside developments that's actually being built at the moment in Great Eastern Quays, and that is, again, very high quality development, and it's working in quite a difficult environment with the needing to clean the docks and deal with issues around the dock walls. It's adjacent, very close to City Airport, flight path, lots of issues that had to be dealt with here, but it's all coming out of the ground and looking extremely good. These are the more traditional sites down on the docks that were former wharves. They've sat and done nothing in terms of land use, jobs, homes, or any really viable function for probably 20 years down there. We have now got a momentum around with our partners at the GLA, who now have control over de-designating the wharves as well as de-designating these sites as strategic industrial land performing a function for London. And part of that as well is, in terms of sustainability opportunities here, we want to use the water, get a new Thames Clipper pier in front of these sort of developments. So, in the round, we're just sort of driving them with producing the quality. And as you see from there, there's in excess of 3,000 homes as well, and phase 1 and phase 2 all completely sold out. So Galleons Quarter is another project, 2 phases, 600 and 800 homes, and I'm probably beginning to sound like a broken record. I think I'm nearly finished to talk about Silvertown Quays, which is a big mixed-use development. Again, overall, we're looking for this to, developers give you numbers all the times about what commercial floor space will drive in terms of jobs. Anyway, the headlines around this one are a sort of 15,000 jobs over the next 10, 15 years to build out. And across the way, then we go to the Asian Business Port development, which is the Chinese investor-led development adjacent to our own building, actually down in the docks. And that's looking at around 15,000 jobs. So 2 sites, and you're looking at 25,000 jobs. And that's just those 2 sites down in the docks. So they're all brownfield sites. We've made that leap of faith in terms of telling people they can be developed and that they produce really good outcomes for our residents and for our existing investors and stakeholders in the borough. So I hope that gives you some flavour of what's going on in Newham. It's the tip of the iceberg. there's something else I could have talked about in the docs that might be 10,000 homes. It's phenomenal numbers, and size matters to Newham, and we're trying to do things at the scale and at the pace that is required, and I hope that there won't be too much of a pause on that in the next few months, and that we can carry on that very successful journey. So thank you very much.